Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Coming up on The Payoff, Angela Pugh is a recovery rock star. Her whole life was alcoholism and drinking, and now her whole life is recovery and giving back. Her podcast is called Addiction Unlimited. You got to check it out, not just because there's an episode with me on there coming up. She is an interventionalist. She owns recovery homes. She has grown up in Kansas City, moved to LA. Now she's back in Kansas City, travels a lot, covers a lot of ground, working in recovery all the time. And her personality is awesome. She is one of the people that when you talk to her, you feel better after you talk to her. And as somebody else who's in recovery, she is a part of my tribe. And it's very easy to connect for me to connect with people like this. And she's inspiring. And I think you're going to find her really interesting. And without further ado, Angela Pugh. I didn't mean to rhyme like that. But first, Kevin Souza. I was asking, are you in Kansas City or in Los Angeles?
I am in Kansas City.
Okay. How's everything going in the with all the recovery stuff? All like your houses and all that stuff? Good?
Listen, my houses are a little bit of a pain in the ass right now.
Yeah. Really? Like how so?
It's like it all comes in waves. You know what I mean? Like it'll be like I have very drama-free, sober living. We have a very good thing going, but it's like it comes in waves as far as maintenance, right? Like we have a freezer that's being a jerk and the dishwasher, and I went over and fixed as many things as I could, and it didn't fix it all the way. So repairman. And then there's mice at my other house. So we're trying to get rid of that. And yeah, it's like it just comes in waves. Like there won't be anything for 6 months.
Yeah.
And then one thing will happen and it'll just be another and another and another. So we're just in that little phase right now.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's better than people stuff.
Oh yeah, no, people's stuff is always pretty good at my houses. But I was very strategic in how I structured my sober living. Not only in rules, but in just being really intentional about the population I want to serve and who I don't want to serve. Also, a lot of concern safety for myself, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not going to work with the prison system and things like that. People coming off the street, like that's not going to be my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
For a million reasons. But yeah, I was just very strategic in how I set it up. So our intake process is its own thing. My rules are part of that. You know, I definitely have some more rules than other sober livings have. And I'm very hands-on, you know, nothing's falling through the cracks.
Yeah. Let's get to, you're giving so much back to recovery, right? You're giving what was so freely given to you, right?
Yeah.
You're giving it away. And that's why you and I are talking. There's a mutual respect and a mutual connection. And there's also like I feel in sync, you know what I mean? I'm talking to another addict, another alcoholic.
Yeah.
I want to go back. I want to go through your story. I'm going to ask all the questions, but I want to go back to the very beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Kansas City.
Okay, so you grew up in Kansas City.
Mhm.
Family, what was growing up family life like? Because my dad, his side of the family, we always say like alcohol didn't run in the family, it galloped. And I mean, it was big time alcoholism. What did you have any of that in your family growing up?
Yeah, huge on both sides too. Mom's side, dad's side, full of addiction. I would say not so much alcohol as drugs, right? Like I think alcohol came with some of the younger generations, me and my cousins, you know, but really like My parents and their siblings were more drugs. Not my mom, she's never done anything. She's the least addicted person in the world somehow. But all of her siblings, my father, many of his siblings, like just a ton of addiction. Like I got it from every angle.
So growing up, were you kind of like hip to that? Was your mom ever like, "Hey, you need to watch out for this. Like this is in you."
No, I don't even know that they understood that, to be honest. You know what I mean? Like I think that, and I mean, a lot of the genetic proof didn't come until later, 'cause that was part of my story. When I got sober, they were just proving a lot of the parts of the brain and the genetics that were a part of addiction, right? So I think a lot of that stuff had been theory prior, but there wasn't any proof saying that, it's a family disease, so to speak. So I don't think that they were aware of that. I knew, yeah, I had parents that were polar opposites. Like my mom was this incredible, nearly perfect being. She was just a phenomenal mom and smart and funny and so caring and had so much integrity. And then my dad was, exactly who I turned out to be. My dad was just, he was a wild man. He was a partier and he liked to do his thing. And he wasn't, like, his outward behavior with us wasn't crazy, like, our household wasn't crazy. He wasn't abusive or anything like that. What I remember mostly is, like, he would just be shut in his room. Like, he would always be in his room with the door closed, and his friends would come over and go in the room and close the
No
door,
way. Okay.
so that was it, but there wasn't a lot of drama or chaos. Like I knew there was discord for sure because, he wasn't handling his part of the responsibilities as a husband and a father.
Yeah.
But we left when I was 7. And I think, obviously when I was a little bit older, things started to become more clear what his
So he's
issue
back in there
was.
in that room, probably doing drugs, partying with people. And finally,
Yeah.
your mom is like, "Hey, I got to get my kids out of here. This guy's awesome. I love him, but this is not a place to raise a family."
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, listen, you're talking about, I mean, I'm old. So you're
You're
talking
not
about
that
this.
old. You said that on your pod. I've checked you out. You're not that old. You're not. Uh,
I'm about to be 52.
that's not old.
I'm getting there. I'm
Yeah.
getting
All
there.
right. Yeah. I'm not too
Um,
far behind you. Yeah.
well, it was the 70s, right? So there were struggles as a woman, right? Like it wasn't a simple thing for my mother to just up and leave my father. First, he didn't work. She had to work, right? She worked a man's job. She was only like the third female in our area to have the job that she had. She did telephone repairs. She climbed telephone poles. She was 95 pounds and 5 feet tall,
Whoa.
climbing telephone poles to support her family. Like my mom is not effing around when it comes to her kids,
Yeah.
So she's handling business. But when it came time really to leave my father, she had a really hard time finding a home to rent for us without her husband's signature.
Wow.
She had problems opening a bank account without her husband's signature. So it wasn't just a simple process. It was something that she was working on very covertly for a long period of time before we finally had the escape plan.
Yeah, that's wild because my dad was, the functional alcoholic, whatever that is. And my mom, I know that there were times when she'd had enough. And I mean, she still is. She's just the best woman ever. My parents were both incredible parents. They loved the shit out of me. We all come with our faults. And I think my
Yeah.
mom didn't have, she had too much fear to ever even think about crossing that threshold that your mom did.
Right. So
Yeah.
just flip that, right? My mom had too much fear to stay.
Okay.
And I think, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what happened that was like the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, why she finally said enough is enough, we're out of here. I don't know what this situation was. I think that his behavior was getting a little more unpredictable,
Yeah.
right? And she was, like I said, my mom's not messing around when it comes to her kids. Like, there, do not get between this lady and her kids. She
Yeah.
is insane, So him being any type of unpredictable with us would have for sure been it. Like she would not stand for that at all.
Okay, so you're 7 years old, you guys move out. What what kind of kid were you?
Oh, those were the best years of my life right there. Um, It was, I was pretty reserved. I was definitely an introvert my whole life. When I was drinking, I thought I was an extrovert, but I realized I was just drunk, but I was never really an extrovert, right? I just drank until I appeared to be an extrovert. But I was always a pretty reserved kid. I was a very smart kid. My mom was super intentional with that. Me and my older brother both. We read before we ever went to kindergarten, and she always worked with us on stuff. And it was really important to me to be a smart kid. And, I was always a spelling bee champ, and I've just read books endlessly. Like, you never caught me without a book in my hand. So I was a
That's
pretty
awesome.
quiet kid. Yeah, but I definitely had I can see now I definitely had all the trauma stuff too. Like it had been installed. You know,
Yeah.
it was there. I was very painfully insecure and already had that sense of not fitting in anywhere. Like I didn't look like other people, my clothes weren't like other people, and part of that was where we had come from, but never feeling pretty enough or skinny enough. Like I even remember having thoughts about weight and my body as young as like 4th or 5th grade, having those concerns, and like we couldn't afford the same brands of clothes that other people had. So I didn't fit in that way. Just all of that stuff was definitely there.
So now we're cooking, right? You're developing. When is the first drink or drug? When does that take place in your life?
Well, I'm going to give you a plot twist
Let's
too.
go.
So we, okay, so we got my stepfather when I was 10, and then my mom had 2 more babies, right? So I have little brothers, 10 and 12 years younger than me. So the babies became my whole life, right? My whole teenage life was helping raise babies. And both of my little brothers had health issues. So it wasn't a normal just having babies around the house. Like it was a very stressful, a lot of illness, a lot of doctor's appointments, a lot of ER visits. Like it was a lot. It was a heavy situation. And my stepfather worked. He was fantastic provider for the family. My mom had to leave her job. She started doing things working from home and eventually built her own business. But everything became about the babies. So all of a sudden I had this period of years that I was very sort of normal and well adjusted because I had a purpose,
Yep.
right? Everything was about the babies.
Yeah.
So
You're out of
I
self.
had I was out of self
Yeah.
100%. And I was super well adjusted and I had really healthy boyfriends and healthy boundaries and I was doing really great. And I had drank one time when I was probably 13 or 14. A friend's older brother. It was summertime, all the parents were at work, right? And my buddy's older brother, who was a bad kid anyway, and he had Seagram 7. So he got all of us little kids and we're drinking Seagram 7. I don't know how much I had, but it was way too much. I'm face down in the front yard. I'm throwing up. It was a nightmare. And I was like, F that, dude. That is not the life for me.
Yeah.
Like I didn't want any part of it. I was not a person that drank the first time and fell in love with it. That was not my story at all. I wanted no part of it. So from that point forward, my teenage years were just very different. It was all about the boys and taking care of them and making sure they were okay. And I was happy, had a pretty happy existence. And then,
Are you still in
and
Kansas
then
City? Like at that time?
still in
Okay.
Kansas City.
All right. Any
Then I
word from
started
dad?
working in bars. No, my dad was around.
Okay.
I didn't spend a ton of time with him. Obviously he wasn't a safe person really to be
Yeah.
around. And, more than him, I don't know that I didn't feel unsafe with him. I just knew that my safety wasn't a priority. That's probably a better way to
Yeah. I
say it.
mean,
Right? Like he was
yeah.
just wrapped up in his own
Yeah.
thing
Yeah.
and he would always have his partying friends around
Yeah.
and it just wasn't like I wasn't comfortable, so I didn't really hang with him too much. Like I would see him at his mom's house, right? My grandmother, I was always really tight with my grandmother. So like I would see him here and there over there, but I didn't like him.
Okay.
Like, I was very aware of who and what he was
Uh huh.
and and that all that trauma, right? Like, listen, especially as a girl, your dad is the first man that teaches you how you should be treated by a man.
Hmm.
And when your dad doesn't really care if you live or die, it doesn't set a great precedent. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like when your dad doesn't even care about your well being, there's a lot of anger and resentment and disappointment and heartbreak. So I had all of those issues with him, long before I could articulate it or put words to it.
Yeah.
I had all of that with him.
Yeah. That's, well, I mean, I don't want to jump forward. We'll get to this, but that's why a program and sobriety is just instrumental to
Yeah.
living life like to your fullest because it teaches you how to go through all that stuff because
Right. Right.
we all have it, and when we get sober it's like, okay, let's take time to take a look at it, now you start to drink, like you mentioned the first time with the Seagrams. Then you mentioned, I cut you off, but you mentioned working in bars. I would imagine that
Yeah.
for me, working in bars was like a launching pad. I mean, I had been drinking a
Oh,
little bit and I love drinking, but once I started to work in that environment, it was over before it started.
100%. And I can look back now where, like, I wasn't drinking like a maniac from day one, right? Like, I had no tolerance. I wasn't like obsessed with alcohol or anything from day one. But you're right. Once you're in that environment, everybody that I saw drank every day.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden that was normal. I thought everybody in the world drank every day, So it became normal. And now looking back, it's like I wasn't crazy out of control from day one, but I drank every day from day one. And there's nothing normal about that either, right? Like non addicted people don't drink every day. They don't think about drinking every day. They don't even consider drinking every day, even if it's only a couple of drinks, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I did it wrong from the beginning. It took me a long time to really get out of control. I had many, many years that I drank pretty mellow. Definitely drank alcoholically, no doubt, but I didn't have any consequences. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't sloppy. I wasn't getting in any trouble. I wasn't doing anything nuts. I was a very controlled, drunk person. It's just I'm a very controlled person in general. But so drinking, I was the same way, right? And my tolerance built up so slowly over time that I just was not ever really a sloppy drunk. And until probably the very end, I started to get a little sloppy. But
So were you bartending at this time?
yeah, I was
Yeah.
bartending and yeah, just having a blast. I mean, what a great freaking job. Like
Yeah.
I made such ridiculous money from such a young
Where
age.
did you
I
bartend? Any
moved
place you care to mention? Like,
I mean, I don't even think any place that even exists anymore.
okay.
It's like 100 years ago. you know?
But so you were bartending in Kansas City, and I would imagine like those
Well,
are some of the.
I did some bar back in Kansas City and then I moved to LA. I moved to LA right
Okay.
before I turned 21.
Uh-huh.
So I
What what
saved
what
up
drove you
a
out
whole
there?
like $64 and I moved across the country.
So what was the motive to move across the country?
Really, I always loved California. I have an aunt and uncle that lived in San Diego, so I would go there for spring breaks and stuff. And I mean, listen, the '80s, hair bands, heavy metal, the whole thing. And we would drive from San Diego up to LA and spend time up there. And I just loved the whole vibe, right? And I knew I wanted out of Kansas City. One of my struggles was just you hear a lot of alcoholics talk about this, just the never fitting in, right? Just like I talked about when I was a kid, I had that stuff. Well, even as I hesitate to say adult because I'm only 20 years old, um, but even as a young woman, like I just didn't fit in. And I was always just a little extra for Kansas City, right? A little more flamboyant, a little more out there. I'm more of a go getter. And this is a very beautiful, conservative place with the nicest people on the planet, but they're very laid back. They're family oriented people and they want to work and they want to take care of their families and they want to go on vacations and they're very happy and content, right? I've never had a content moment in my life. Like it's let's go, let's do this. What are we doing next? More, like a good alcoholic. It's all more, more. So I just didn't fit. I felt like I was walking around this place like I had this flashing neon sign on my head, like what in this picture doesn't belong, and I just wanted to go somewhere where I could be crazy if I wanted to be crazy. And I didn't have every person in my family judging every move I made and everything I did that wasn't quote unquote right. Like I knew I didn't want to get married. I knew I didn't want to have kids. I knew I wanted to be rich. I knew I wanted to have businesses. And that just wasn't the norm where I was, you know? So I was like, I got to get out of here and go where the people are going for it. That's what I want.
So you get to LA, did you feel the immediate sense of forget alcohol and anything like that, but when you got there and let's say you're on the strip or going to watch music or whatever, those you mentioned like those 80s rock bands. That was a really cool time. I mean, just the
Oh,
stuff I see
beautiful
and read
time.
and watch about it. Because I love that kind of music, like, just Guns N' Roses and all that stuff, Motley Crue. Like, when you got there, were you like, these are my people? I'm here, I'm home? Or were you like, ooh, wherever I go, there I am?
Oh, no, I was thrilled. I was absolutely thrilled. And are you kidding me? All those beautiful boys. Yeah, no, it was perfect. It was absolute perfection. It was so much fun. And being in the bars, you know what I mean? Like, I didn't worry about getting a job or not being able, it's not like I was an actor where, I didn't have paid work. Like, I knew I would get a job immediately,
Yeah.
because there's a million bars, right?
And you know
So,
how to bartend.
and I know how to bartend,
Yeah.
right. So, yeah, I just got right in the mix, like having a blast. I will say that, once I was in such a different environment, I definitely like my Midwestern roots definitely became more clear to me too.
Hmm.
And my more conservative pieces were like, oh, there they are. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. My mom would be proud to know that's there.
You still have it at the core.
Yeah, my roots were still my roots,
When you
but
left,
no, I loved it.
when you left Kansas City, did you break any hearts? Did you leave any relationships behind? No?
No,
Okay.
no.
So you get to
Gosh,
California.
I don't even know that I would be the right person to ask. You probably wanna ask one of my best friends.
So you get to California. That's a no. So you get to California and you start to bartend. Do we see any consequences start to pop up or no? You're making good money. Where were you bartending? Like what area? What?
All over Hollywood and
Okay.
Beverly Hills.
Awesome.
Yeah, I
Okay.
lived I lived in Hollywood. I lived in Beverly Hills when I first moved to LA, and then I moved into Hollywood pretty quickly, and I stayed. I mean, I lived in the same apartment in Hollywood for 9 years. So, yeah, I was I had my station.
What was your first moment where you were starstruck in LA?
Um, Kevin Spacey came in my bar one night, and I just loved him, and gosh, he was so cool, and his assistant came in my bar, right? And I didn't know that he was the assistant to Kevin Spacey. I had no idea. So one night, he and his friend, say me and my friend, they're like, "Oh, we're gonna go drink after hours. We got some people coming over. I'm house sitting. Do you guys want to come over?" And we're like, "Yeah, sure." So I get off work, we go up, and we're driving up in the canyons, right? And anybody who live in LA, like the higher up you go in the canyon, like we hit a certain point, and I looked at my girlfriend and I'm like, you don't live this high up
Yeah.
if you're just a regular person,
Yeah.
And so we're just driving up and up and up, and we get to this house, and right when we walked in the door, there was a huge round like entry table, and it was just stacked with mail, right? And there was a manila envelope right on top that said Kevin Spacey. And I was just like, oh,
Whoa.
freaking out because he was one of my favorite people. And so I don't know, maybe a week later, the guy brought Kevin Spacey into the bar. And I literally was like going back and forth, back and forth in front of him. I'm like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. And I finally stopped and I was like, okay, I was trying really hard to be cool, but there's just no way to be cool. It is such a pleasure to meet you. And he was laughing. He was super cool.
So that like and that's just a window into like the kind of life you're involved in. I mean, that's
Yeah.
that was like the perfect answer to a question like that because it really does. It's a microcosm of how you were living at that time and what was going on. You continue to bartend. Was there like a moment like as you started to matriculate, as a bartender, for lack of a better word, where you were like, shit, this is my life now. It's constantly alcohol. It's constantly the same people. You and I have talked on your podcast, Addiction Unlimited, which I'll talk about on the intro. I already talked about because I'll tape it after. We talked about you weren't like a drug person, but in
Okay.
that environment, you're around a shitload of drugs.
God, in LA back then, like everybody tried to pay you with cocaine. You know what I mean? Like, how many times a night did somebody like slide a bindle across the bar to pay their tab? And I'm like, dude, number one, I don't get down like that. Number two, my landlord doesn't take cocaine as payment. You know what I mean? Like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna need cash, you know?
You were
But
probably
yeah, it was
perfect for that environment.
it was crazy. But listen, I didn't do drugs because my father did drugs. So that was my vow because I never wanted to be like him.
Yeah.
Little did I know I was exactly his carbon copy. I just had a different drug of choice,
Yeah.
because I turned out exactly like him. But yeah, I never did drugs because I didn't want to be like my dad. That was my thing with anything like that. But all my friends did drugs. I mean, you can't be in LA and not be around drugs.
Yeah. When was the moment when you felt like alcohol had you in a headlock?
So I remember this is another really beautiful thing about LA, right? Is you are exposed to the sober world, like whether you want to be or not. Like the sober community in bigger cities is just phenomenal, right? So I always knew people or worked with other bartenders or cocktail servers who were sober people. And there was this one guy, his name was Noah. I will never forget him the rest of my life. And he used to come in my bar and he was a sober guy. And he would hang out and he knew like some of the girls that worked there and he would just hang out and drink water or soda or whatever. I don't remember what he drank, but he talked about going to meetings and being sober. And I was 24, I think. And it was the first time that I had the conscious thought, like, I wonder if I'm an alcoholic because I just knew. Again, I wasn't drinking out of control. I wasn't consuming a ton of alcohol and throwing up every night or passing out or blacking out. I wasn't doing any of that. But I knew that it had taken a really significant role in my life. And when I would hear him talk about his experience, there was just something with Noah that I resonated with. And I remember saying to him, like, do you think I'm an alcoholic? And he kind of laughed, right? Because how I drank at that point, I'm sure I didn't look like an
Yeah,
alcoholic,
yeah,
and certainly for the level I
yeah.
got to, I mean, I went pro, but, I remember him kinda laughing and like, "No, Angela, like, don't even be thinking about that right now, like,
Yeah.
you're fine, don't worry about it," and I was like, "Okay," but that was the first time that I kind of wondered, and it took me until probably 30. I moved back to Kansas City when I was 30, and that's when it got really ugly,
Uh-huh.
is when I relocated.
And so what happens when you went back home? First of all, why'd you leave LA?
It just exhaustion.
Yeah.
Like I was tired of just it's so high maintenance to be in a big city. You know what I mean? Like everything you do every single day requires more energy,
Hmm.
especially as a female, right? It's like you just have to always be so aware of your surroundings. You're always kind of looking over your shoulder. Your car is getting broken into, your stuff's getting stolen. You know what I mean? Like it's just a lot. To go to the store is a whole extravaganza of, like driving around the block 18 times,
Uh-huh.
getting in probably a mild road rage event for a parking spot, or, having to fight a homeless person for the parking spot, or they're trying to wash your car when you walk away and make you give them money when you come out. And I mean, it's just a lot. And I was worn out. I was just exhausted. And I kind of wanted to go somewhere and just chill. I just wanted to be able to relax a little bit.
So you go back to Kansas City and
Yeah, that wasn't my choice. I wanted to go I wanted to go Santa Barbara or San Diego.
well, I was
Those were
about to
my
say my brother, I told you about him on your podcast.
yeah,
He lived in Hermosa and Manhattan Beach, and he literally
beautiful. Yeah.
wouldn't leave those places because
Yeah.
of what you're talking about. I mean, if he had to go somewhere else, I would hear about it,
Right.
because he would bitch, about having to
Now that's
drive.
how it is out there
Yeah.
too, because also it takes so long to get anywhere,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So we do become very secluded in our communities. And people in Kansas City used to ask, like, oh, do you go to the beach all the time? I'm like, no, it
Yeah.
takes like an hour
You
and a
never
half
go.
to
Yeah.
get there. It's only 10 miles, but
Yeah.
it takes an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half to get there. So no, we don't go to the beach. And now, as an older person, right, when I'm in LA, I'm on the West Side. Like, I'm never in Hollywood. That's a young person's
Mhm.
game. And I'm in Malibu in the Palisades. Like, it's a much more chill, relaxed vibe. And that's what I love. So, yeah, it does kind of end up a little bit secluded because we just don't leave our little boroughs.
Yeah, so but you left your borough and you go back to, your original place,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
things start to get ugly. How do they start to get ugly? Like, what starts to happen?
It was such a freaking culture shock because I spent my first adult decade in Los Angeles, right? Like, that's a very different lifestyle and a different way of living. I made a ton of money. I lived this beautiful life that was virtually limitless, right? Like, I could go wherever I wanted, I could buy whatever I wanted. I went to all the greatest parties. Like, it was just incredible. And then I moved to Kansas City, and all of a sudden it's like I'm in a place where I don't fit in again, right? And at that point, now I'm a decade strong. I was very LA, and
Yeah.
you transplant me back to the super
It,
conservative
it's it's
Midwest.
it's it's almost like impossible. Again, like with my brother. By the way, it's worth mentioning both my brothers lived out there and they worked at the House of Blues. Um,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Bartended there, a lot of drugs. One of them worked security. My one brother was a stage manager there. But when Kevin, especially my brother, he would come back home to Philadelphia. It was like that an alien had returned. Like
Yes.
it was like he was just different, and he loved that. He loved that he
Yes.
was different, and he was proud of
Yes.
it. But he
Yes.
was like you said earlier, like which one of these things is different? That was it.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
yeah,
you do like your whole energy is different.
yeah,
So I had a very LA energy, and you put me back in the Midwest where people are very mellow and chill, and like their idea of dressing up is their best pair of jeans, and I'm in feather boas everywhere I go. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it was different. It was different. And also, there's a piece of that too where it's like I felt like I couldn't even be myself because if I were to share, just like I remember one night talking or listening really to some people talk, and I was like, I can't even share my stories of what I was doing a week ago. And the week prior, we were at a party, right? But we were deep sea fishing with like one of the biggest rock stars from the 80s, right?
uh-huh.
Like that's what I was doing the week before.
Are you gonna
And a
tell me
week
his name or
later,
no?
no, not on
Okay.
here. But a week later, I'm sitting and I'm thinking like I can't even share my stories because people will just assume I'm lying anyway,
Yeah,
right? So it's like I felt like I had to downplay and hide so much of just who I was because I was back in that situation where I just didn't fit.
yeah, and so the drinking totally starts to ramp up.
Crazy.
Yeah. What are some of the
But I
things?
also, listen, this is a crazy statement too, because I also moved back to Kansas City and was start making way less money, right? Because Kansas City didn't have nightclubs the way LA
Yeah,
nightclubs were, right? So all of a sudden I'm working at a sports bar, making one-fifth the money I was used to making, and I had more bills because I lived in the same spot in Hollywood forever. It was rent controlled. I had a garage parking spot. Like I was spoiled.
yeah.
And all of a sudden I come back, my rent is higher, I'm making less money. I feel like an alien running around this city. Like it was crazy. It was so freaking uncomfortable
Yeah, and so the uncomfortability makes you just drink more and more. And how
for sure.
how do we bottom out? Like like take me to that moment where you get the gift of desperation.
So I leave the bar one night out with all my usual friends, drinking in the usual places. And I went to leave and go home. I did not make it far. And I crashed my car at 70 miles an hour on the freeway and I hit another car. And that was my moment of like, oh shit, like this isn't an option anymore, because I didn't care. I thought I killed the guy that I hit, right? That's just what was in my head at the moment. Like, how do you hit somebody at 70 miles an hour and everybody's okay,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, and I can't tell you like how long I thought that or when they came over and told me he was fine. I don't know. He was fine, by the way. I was the only one injured. But it was just like it never dawned on me that I could hurt somebody else.
Yeah.
I didn't care if I hurt me. I didn't care what happened to me. I hated me. I wanted to die every day just so the pain of living would stop. And but it never crossed my mind that I could hurt another person. And then it was like all the what ifs too. It's like, oh my gosh, like what if he had a kid in his back seat? Or what if we were on a side street and he was on the sidewalk and I hit him?
Yeah.
Like all of these things, I never wanted to hurt somebody else. I
And I'm
never
guessing
wanted
that
to hurt
wasn't the
somebody else.
first time you drank and drove.
No, God, no.
Yeah. Were there any
But
other
listen,
t
here's this is
Yeah, go
this is
ahead.
a crazy thing too, because people will say this like to unqualify themselves from having a drinking problem, like, oh, I've never had any legal problems, I've never had a DUI. But listen, I drove drunk almost every day of my life for probably close to 14 years before I ever got a DUI. It didn't make me less of an alcoholic,
Yeah.
right? It just
Yeah.
means I didn't get caught. I think it was much harder to get caught in LA because their police are actually busy, like they have real things going on, right?
Yeah.
Not like in Kansas City where like the cops are hanging around waiting for you to not use your turn signal or something, right? Like LA, they're busy. They
Yeah,
have real
for
stuff
sure.
happening. So it's just harder to get caught in
Yeah.
general, but, not because I didn't deserve it. It didn't happen for so long, but it didn't make me less of an alcoholic because I never had a DUI, you know?
So now you're having this breakthrough as like you need to do something. And you mentioned, you know, and I take it that happened over the period from coming back from LA and being home in Kansas City where you start to hate your life and hate who you are through the alcoholism, right? I mean, it's like that vicious cycle where you really just start to beat the shit out of yourself. And then there's shame attached to the things you do when you're drunk. And now here we are. It's gotten this bad. What do you do? Like, take me through the moments, like, or the days after that crash where you now are in action. Like Angela's trying to stop this.
Well, my first plan of action was to kill myself. That was my solution because I had gotten a DUI 8 months prior and had had violated the terms of my probation like a few times,
Uh-huh.
and then I crashed.
Okay.
Right? So I had a very so from first DUI to sober was only 8 months, but I got into a lot of a mess
Yeah.
in that very short period of time.
Yeah.
And so now my accident, I knew I'd be charged with another DUI after I'd already failed miserably trying to get finished with all the stuff for the first one. And I knew I was facing a substantial piece of jail time because I was a habitual violator, right? So I was like, this is it. Like I can't do this. I was so disgusted by myself and like having to think about telling my family who already thought I was insane anyway, right? Because they're all the typical Midwestern people, like grow up, go to college, get married, have babies, buy houses. They're those people. And then there's me who's just crazy, right? I'm feral. I'm all over the
Feral.
place doing my
Yeah.
thing. Right. I'm so not conventional in any way. So then it's like now I got to tell them I have all these legal problems and DUIs and they already know I'm nuts. Like I had zero desire to be a part of any of it. And I had this thought, we put so much energy into our outside picture, right? Presenting a certain way to the world to hide how screwed up we are on the inside. And I had this moment after my accident because I face planted the steering wheel in my car. So my nose was broken and my head was cracked in a couple of places. And I didn't have a broken nose like where you get black eyes. I had a broken nose, like it broke the bottom
Uh-huh.
bone.
Yeah.
So the whole lower half of my face was swollen, right?
Yeah.
And then my head was all lumped up from cracks in my head at the top. And I remember sitting there and thinking, like, this is the first time in my life that I look as ugly on the outside as I feel on the inside. Like where that internal picture and the external matched for the first time. And I was like, fuck this. I hate this. I hate me. I hate my life. This is disgusting. And so that was my first plan of action was I was going to kill myself. And I don't really know what happened to that plan. I probably went to bed.
Yeah. Yeah.
I probably went to bed and that was that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I laid low and detoxed obviously for days I had my Rottweiler back then and he and I just chilled on the couch and I went through withdrawal and all that stuff. It was probably about 6 days really that I felt pretty bad, like I had the
Yeah.
flu and body aches and um It was bad. I mean, it could have been a lot worse for sure, but and then I just went to AA. That's all I knew to do, you know? I was like, that's where people go when they don't want to drink anymore, so
Yeah.
that's where I'll go. And I found meetings that were close to my house. I knew I would need to go all the time, and I'm super lazy, so I knew I had to find places that were really close to my house because
Yeah.
otherwise I wouldn't go, especially back then because I didn't do anything. I drank and I recovered from drinking. Like
Yeah.
that was my whole life, you
Uh-huh.
know? So, yeah, I just found some meetings. I conned my best girlfriend into going to my first meeting with me. And I was like, just get me in the door. Just get me. I just got to get in the
Were they
door. It's like,
supportive, your friends?
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
And
are mine.
I was, I understood that we probably wouldn't spend a lot of time together anymore, you know, like my immediate
Yeah.
friends that I drank with all the time, because I knew they were obviously going to continue drinking. So I knew the dynamic would change a little bit. But for me, I knew I had to be out and proud. You know, I could not keep it to myself
Mhm.
or hide it. Like it had to become my identity as much as drinking was my
Yeah.
identity. So yeah, I
We're a
was like,
lot
I went
alike
to,
in that regard. I mean, from the moment I got
yeah,
sober, and for me, I think it made it easier for me because I was so bad. And
yes.
everyone, if you knew me and you were close with me, you knew that I had a problem with alcohol and drugs. That was it. Like, so
Right.
why wouldn't I when I got sober? You know,
Yeah.
and then the charge of recovery takes over. That coupled with, well, what the fuck else am I going to tell people? You know, like, so
Yeah.
here I
Yeah.
am, and like you said, that's who I was from the day, and that made recovery a lot easier. It really did. I mean, it just made it
Yeah.
easier for me. Everybody knew that I didn't drink, and
Yeah.
shit, like all that early recovery stuff comes up, or it's weird, it's wacky, whatever. That doesn't last for that long. You know, and then
No,
you
not
feel
at
pretty
all.
good. So you're going to meetings every day. How did your life start to
Mhm.
change?
It was crazy. You know, I recognized pretty quickly all those, you know, we call in 12 steps, we call it character defects. You know, like I was a liar. I was so selfish. You know, everything in my life was about me. I was super manipulative because I needed everything to be my way. You know, I needed to go to the places I wanted to go to, and I needed it to be with the people I wanted to go with. And if they invited people that I didn't like, then I would get super manipulative and weeding out the people I didn't want to go. Like everything had to be exactly my way all the time, you
Yeah.
know? And it was just gross. And the first thing I noticed is that a lot of that stuff, when I wasn't in that lifestyle, a lot of those character defect things just started to fall by the wayside, right? Like all of a sudden, I didn't have a bunch of stuff to lie about anymore. You know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
like all of a sudden I was like, oh, wait a minute. Like I could actually be an honest person. You know, like I don't have to be super manipulative and, you know, maneuvering all the chess pieces when nobody else even knows there's a chess match happening, you know? It's,
Yeah.
so I just started to see that I could become a good person. And I really never thought I could be a good person. So that sounds weird, but it was almost shocking to me that I could become good. And I think a lot of that too is being such a non-traditional person from a
Mhm.
very traditional place
Yeah.
that it was always portrayed to me like I was bad for being the way that I was. You know, like different equaled bad. So I always just thought I was bad. I always thought I was defective and something was wrong with me. And that's why I was the way I was. So I think that was the first stuff, right? Is just realizing like I could be good or I could be considered good
Yeah.
and be a good human. It was
Well,
fascinating.
that's esteem building, right? Like for
Yeah.
me, because I always thought that I lacked confidence or I was like terribly insecure, which I was as a kid. I mean, we all have that rattling around in there somewhere, but
Yeah.
I allowed it to sort of take over. And then by the time I would have developed at all as a human being, I started to get drunk and started to behave, you know, not poorly to say the least.
Yeah.
And then it was kind of a real shot in the arm when got sober, and I was like, oh wait, like when you do the next right thing, you start to feel good about yourself, and that breeds confidence. And like that was like magical for me. I was like, holy shit, I'm starting
Yeah.
to feel good, and I'm not
Yeah.
defective. You know, was
Yes.
there a moment you can point to in your recovery, whether it was early recovery or first couple months, year, whatever, where you were like, wow, this shit is working. Like this is so, I could see myself doing this forever because I like it.
Yeah, well, I would say I've had 2 major moments, right? So, everybody knew nobody was surprised that I stopped drinking after I crashed my car, right? Because I crashed my car. Like
Yeah.
everybody knew I was like, okay, she's taking a step back. And I waited about 2 weeks. It was exactly 2 weeks from going to my first meeting. Before I told everybody like, I'm not just not drinking right now, but I'm not drinking ever again.
Yeah.
And I was on a date. This guy had come into my bar. He used to come in my bar all the time,
By
right?
the
And
way,
he was
you
from
keep I know this from talking to you. You keep bartending, right?
Yes,
Because that
yes, for years.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
many years. So this guy used to come in my bar and I had the hugest crush on him for like years, right? And he was from LA. So we had a lot in common and he was beautiful. And right after I quit drinking, he asks me out.
Oh shit.
I'm like, damn, dude, like you've got some timing. But okay, yeah, of course I'm going, right? And so we're sitting at dinner and I had told him, right? Like, I'm not drinking, like, I just quit drinking. It's been 2 weeks, right? So I was straight up about the whole thing. We're sitting at dinner and the server comes over and he's ordering a glass of wine. He looks at me, he goes, I feel weird. Like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't want to offer you anything because you're not drinking, but I feel like I'm leaving you out. And so many things went through my head,
Mm.
right? Like, I want him to like me. I want another date. I've been waiting forever for him to ask me out. Like, I want this to be fun and all this stuff. And then the next thing that went through my head was like, listen, this is not the dude I'm going to marry, right? And I was like, you don't make permanent decisions based on temporary people. And that was the first moment that I knew I was really locked in.
Yeah.
Because prior to that, I was so unhealthy with dating. I would sacrifice anything for a boy to like me. You know what I mean? So
Sure.
to even to be cognizant enough to recognize that like my sobriety was so much more significant than, the 10 minutes that I was going to date this person, that was huge. And I just knew like, yeah, I'm really serious about this.
Yeah.
And then I knew the next moment I was at 4 months sober, about 4 months in, I knew that I wanted my whole life to revolve around recovery. I didn't know what that was gonna look like. I just knew that I wanted everything I did to be recovery related forever.
And I love how, you know, you were working in a bar. I mean, this is not like a blueprint for people like to get sober and do, but that this is your
Right.
story. And I love how you talked about being around recovery in LA. And a lot of people are in that industry and they're sober. So
Yeah.
like navigating that, like how you did, I would imagine like you were just really in the program. Like you're in the program, like you said, it became who you were. I think that's
Yeah.
essential. For me, it was to get sober. When I
I think
really
you have to match the energy, right? That's how it made sense to me. It's like, well, I drank every day. So I need to go to a meeting every day. Like that was just logic to me.
yes.
It wasn't that AA says show up every day. I just knew I had to match the energy. Whatever energy I put into drinking, I needed to put the same energy into sobriety.
Yeah.
Period. That it just was so logical to me. But I did, I went to a meeting every day at noon, and the bar where I worked when I got sober, I had to be at work at 5. So I would go sit in my noon meeting and I was on fire. I mean, I was loving
Yeah, yeah.
this. Every person that shared, I was like, hell yes, me too. I did
Yeah.
the same thing, or I thought that too. Like every person, I felt like all of the confusion of my whole life was starting to come together and make sense. And I wasn't defective, right? I thought I was defective and not repairable until I got to AA. And I started to understand there's nothing wrong with me, right? And I'm fixable. But I was just learning so much about myself and my personality and who I was. And I would get to work at 5 and I'd be like, guess what I learned in AA today? I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm telling everybody, I'm serving all my regulars their beers and telling them the life lessons I got in Alcoholics Anonymous. But it was incredible. And everybody was so on board. And then all my regulars, and we had another restaurant across the street from my bar that when they would close, they'd all come over to my bar and drink, right? Which is just service industry. It's how we all
Sure.
are. And they started celebrating my months with me. So they're showing up with cupcakes to celebrate my 2 months and 3 months and 4 months. And like everybody was just so on my team. And had I not had that environment, I don't know if I would have been able to bartend and stay sober.
Yeah.
I just had worked at that particular place for a really long time, and it was my extended family, so I was welcome to really be myself and be open, and everybody just jumped right on to support me. If that wasn't the situation, I don't know that I would have stayed.
Tell me something that I know nothing about. What's it like being an attractive woman in the rooms of recovery, like early on? Like, is there anything like scary about that? Is there anything, something like,
This is a really big question you've just presented. I'll tell you, it is different being a girl all the way around,
okay,
right? Like something you have to understand being a girl is you have to always be aware of your surroundings. You have to always have some level of awareness of what's happening around you, who's behind you, who's by your car, you know. Because it's not safe, unfortunately. And the bad thing as a girl is it's not that we think that all guys are bad, it's that you don't know which ones are bad and which ones aren't.
sure,
And you're not going to risk your safety to find out, right? Like, oh, well, I hope he's not bad. Yeah, let's go in the dark alley together, Like you're just so you have to be very discerning. So I think you already have that awareness as a woman anyway, right? So I think when you walk into those rooms, obviously men are often more sexually driven than women, right?
mhm.
I'm trying to be so PC in this
Well, no, and
conversation.
look, I'll stop you and say 99% of everybody in there is awesome. But there are a couple outliers where you just like, as a guy, you'll see some stuff after a meeting. I'm like, really, dude? Like,
Yeah.
she just walked in,
Yeah.
like, so it's kind of like, I was just curious. Yeah, I don't need a whole dissertation.
It's so gross. Now,
Yeah.
listen, you're also talking about rooms full of people with sex addiction,
Hmm.
love addiction, codependence, people pleasing, right? And all of those things, you put them all together with people that have a struggle with boundaries and people who struggle with relationships anyway. And yeah, you've got a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would say you've got to be mindful for sure. For women, I mean, listen, it's fantastic that you can go to women's meetings if you're more comfortable in that environment. You don't want to mess with the guys.
Yeah.
You're definitely people are going to do and say inappropriate things. I think the thing you have to realize is that's not different in AA than it is at the grocery store or the gym,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
Like that stuff is going to happen regardless of what room you're in.
Hmm.
It's not AA's fault that certain people are pervs. I also want to say women are just as guilty as men because, see, everybody likes to talk about men being the creeps. But women do similar things just in a little different way.
Yeah.
Women have their own ways that there's a term in love addiction called intriguing that is a really fantastic concept. But women have their own ways of doing things and taking actions and being intentional in what they're doing to get attention from different people in different ways. So it's not always men being creepers either. Men are probably just a little more direct about it, and women are a little more undercover about it and then play coy. But everybody is a mess,
Yeah,
So
totally. Anybody can walk through
so
those rooms.
all of that
Yeah.
mess is going to come out.
Yeah. So you start to, like you mentioned, you're really now starting, like, the sunlight of the spirit's coming through you. I can tell just by what you're talking about with like at work and stuff. When do you make the decision that, okay, now this is not only going to be who I am, this is legitimately going to be my life, my business, my purpose, right? Like, when does that happen and how do you make it happen?
So business wise, so I got my first life coach certification when I was about 2 years sober, and that was something I was
When did
always
you get sober,
interested
by the way?
in.
What year?
2006,
Okay.
and I got my first life coach certification in 2008. I was always interested. I was always obsessed with self help,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I could barely string a sentence together, but I always,
Yeah.
I was always obsessed with self help and personal development and all that stuff. And, I followed Tony Robbins from the time I was a very young teenager. So back then it was cassette tapes, right? I had all his cassette tapes and then it was DVDs and CDs. But I just loved the personal empowerment stuff. So for me, recovery played right into that, where it's so weird. I feel like my experience in sobriety is so odd from other people because so many people get tripped up like on being powerless. They get tripped up on that part of AA and they don't want to say they're powerless and they don't want to call themselves an alcoholic. For me, all of that was super empowering. Like I felt like understanding I was an alcoholic and having a place to go to fix myself gave me all the power, like, and that's what I'm a power driven person. Like, that's what I thrive on. So, yeah, I loved it. I loved every piece of it. So, I go home one night, I think after work, I think it was the middle of the night, right? Because most of my life, I didn't go to work till 11 p.m. And I got home. I used to get home from work now at the time I get up and start working,
Yeah.
which is insanity. But so I get home from work one night, it's like 3 in the morning, right? And I'm chilling with my dog. And the TV show Intervention comes on. And I'm sitting on my couch and it was like somebody reached through the television and grabbed me. And I'm like scooching up to the edge of my couch and I'm watching this show and I'm like, oh, damn, like that's what I was made to do. And that was it. I binged Intervention. I watched as many of them as I could, and I wanted to be an interventionist. So I was like, how do I do that, right? Especially almost 20 years ago, like intervention was not the industry it is today. Like it
No.
was a small group of people doing this, and there was only a few girls doing it for sure. So being in middle America too, where I don't have treatment and sober living and all that stuff. I lived in a city that was unadulterated by the treatment industry at that point. So I had to just start digging around on the internet. Like, how do I become an interventionist? What education do I need? What training do I need? Where do I go to get that? And that was really my first thing was just all my energy went into becoming an interventionist.
And what year was
And
this around?
so that was probably around 2008. That
Okay.
was yeah, probably around 2008. I started cold calling interventionists, literally. Cold calling interventionists going, "Hey, my name's Angela and I want to be an interventionist." I'm like, I'm asking people, which is so insane now. Like I think about how I would respond to a phone call like this today. And most people kind of did hang up on me, but I did find a couple of people that were willing to help. But I was just like, listen, if I pay my own travel, can I come and just shadow you on your next intervention?
For an
Like,
intervention.
that's it. Like, I just want to shadow you. Just let me sit in the corner. I'll shut up. And I just want to know. I want to know how to do this and I want to know how to do it really well. And most people did hang up on me, but I did. I found a couple of people that let me do it. And I got the education that I needed and the training. I did more trainings and there was one very small organization and I became a part of it and I started going to their conferences and meeting the other interventionists around the world and yeah, that was the first thing that started my career.
How do you walk into an intervention as the interventionalist? Like, is there anything you do to prepare? That's got to be. I would say, AA and God, my higher power, like that. I constantly am using that to walk through fear, right? So I would imagine there is fear, or maybe there isn't. I don't know. For me, there would be wrapped up in doing an intervention. Like, how do you manage that?
So I'm really in meditation and visualization like an entire morning before I go to an intervention. I do a lot of work with the family, like whoever else is going to be in that room. It's very important that the energy of that room is a certain way. No chaos, no drama, no panic, manic, histrionic, anything. Like the vibe in that room has to be super chill. And we are staying on point. We're having one conversation. This is not family therapy. We have one goal and intervention is it's strategy, right? And every single piece of it is strategy from where I have people sit in the room, what order we read letters in, like every piece of it is strategy. And you have to be reading all the pieces of the room at the same time to know what your next move is. So it's predictable in some ways because addiction is very predictable but people are not super predictable. So you always have to be prepared for, whatever loose cannon is going to be flying out of left field somewhere. And, like whatever, like whoever, somebody's going to throw something crazy out. Like, I remember when you were 15 and you did blah. And it's like, whoa, easy. Okay. Okay. We acknowledge that, but this isn't the time, like it's just, there can definitely be a little bit of chaos, but I am always like, my hope and prayer always is that the person feels safe and comfortable and know that we are coming from a place of love. We're not forcing them to do anything. Like, this is very logic based, right? It's like, listen, dude, we just put together a team because we're worried about you. We just want you to join your own team. That's all. Like, we're just having a conversation about what's the best way to approach this.
Yeah.
And I just always want them to feel safe more than anything. Like, they're going to be a little irritated, of course, but I want them to know that they're safe and that they don't need to panic and that we can figure out anything. We can fix anything. And so I'm always just in that meditation, visualization, making sure that I'm doing the right things, making sure that I am conveying the right message so they don't panic. And really, I go into it very laid back, right? Like, the more normal you can walk into that room, it just brings everybody's defenses down. It's like,
Mhm.
I'm showing up with like coffee and donuts or bagels. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like a
Because
regular person.
immediately, just like a regular person,
Yeah.
right? Because immediately everybody can kind of exhale. And the truth is, we're just having a conversation.
Yeah.
When it comes down to it, we're just having a conversation. Like, nobody needs to panic.
Yeah. That's amazing stuff. All right. So what have I not asked you? What have I left out? Because I've kept you for an hour. I try to keep, I try to keep it as an hour. I respect your time, but anything I've left out, it's just been an amazing story. This is one of those stories where I feel better than I did when I started. So I appreciate you
Oh, I appreciate that.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you give
Yeah.
me that time. Like anything
Listen,
else you want people to know about you or about recovery?
I would say recovery in general. We do, because you've got a really amazing story too. But you get to a place of having an amazing story by staying committed and really just letting your life unfold in front of you. There's nothing I do today that I could have foreseen the day I got sober, or the first year I got sober, the second year I got sober. It's like, you really have to just keep showing up and trust the process. Like, the opportunities will present themselves. Whatever things you want to be different in your life will happen, but you've got to show up in order for the opportunities to show up.
What about you? Where can people find you, like on social media and stuff? I'll put all the stuff in the show notes.
Yeah, I'm everywhere at Addiction Unlimited. I mean, that's the podcast, that's the Instagram, that's the Facebook group, that's the website.
Okay.
So at Addiction Unlimited, addictionunlimited.com, Addiction Unlimited everywhere.
Oh, well, Angela, I can't thank you. Like this was an awesome convo. Yeah.
Thank
I'm so
you.
pumped we linked up and got to do this.
Yeah, me too, for sure.
Thanks so much for listening to The Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.